Hello everyone, this is your host Professor Reha here with a discussion on legendary set focused builds that I usually go for when playing the Conjurer or the Occultist Shaman combination. This was requested specifically by Josh Dion. I believe that's how you pronounce your name. If not, I apologize. Now, full disclosure, while I have played most of these builds, there is one or two that I haven't personally played with this combination. I have played with those builds with other combinations. I will detail what those are when I get to them. And a few of these I have not played in a while. Specifically the pet-focused ones I have not heavily played since they majorly overhauled the pets. This is partially because at one point I lost my data for Grim Dawn and had to start over from scratch. But I was not able to test more recently, since the major pet change, the pet builds for this. Some of these I have recently retested in group settings. I will detail these as well. So, with that being said, keep in mind that my information on these will be slightly outdated overall, but the general thread of the idea should remain the same, and of course, as always, experiment. These videos are intended to provide you with some inspiration and some thoughts when you go to build with these. We'll be referring back to the Conjurer class build here, the skills, back and forth through the item sets. But let's start right off. So the first one is the Rotgeist. Now this has always been my favorite build, and I'm talking about this one first because I'm currently working on a character with my family running this. It's not complete yet, obviously, but I have used this fairly extensively. This is my favorite build with the Conjurer, even though I don't actually build pets with this. I know that the original point of conversation that Josh Dion was talking about was with pets. I'm just going to cover all of the endgame sets for the combination, and this one's my favorite. The reason why this one's my favorite is because it boosts Primal Strike, and not only that, but it converts Primal Strike to Vitality damage without changing the fact that it stuns people still. You keep the stun here, which is amazing. So you build a delicious Poison Acid Vitality set. Actually, why am I even talking about this when we can get right into it? Although I want to cover the rest of the set first. So obviously, it's changing Primal Strike into Vitality damage. That much is obvious. But what's even more significant is not only is Primal Strike going to stun, it's going to heal you a little bit, which is absolutely amazing. And it's doing Vitality Decay damage over time while the enemy is stunned. And of course, additionally, you have huge boosts to Drieg's Evil Eye, which is absolutely phenomenal. Alright, we also have increased Vitality Decay and Poison damage right here with this set. So already right off the top, once you complete the set, you're getting huge benefits. But let's get into some of the more specifics here. Right, you have an increase to Storm Surge, lovely. The actual chest piece overall is fairly standard, converts lightning damage to vitality damage, allowing you to splash in Savagery if you really wanted to, or Brute Force is another option. Those are the primary ones that you would go into. I mean, some people will say Storm Totem, but you can already convert that into vitality damage anyways, with just the investment of an extra skill point into the crystal modification, so I don't really consider that, oh, converting lightning damage. No, I honestly just convert the Storm Totem through its built-in crystal modification to vitality damage. It's kind of silly to use items for that. But, nevertheless, you can very easily splash Savagery and or Brute Force in here if you really want to. That's totally up to you. I don't usually, but I have before. Over here, we have healing from Drieg's Evil Eye, which is a nice to have. I usually use the modification that makes it, I can't remember what it's called off the top of my head, hold on. I usually use Focused Gaze when I use Drieg's Evil Eye because I really love the absolutely massive explosion, the huge increase in damage, and the reduced physical damage the enemy is dealing. I just really appreciate these aspects of Focused Gaze, so I don't necessarily see a ton of healing off of this a lot of the time. It's just one big splash, I'll heal some back. A modest amount, but not anything crazy. But it is nice to have, definitely, absolutely. And then we have the mask. Again, these are some pretty basic changes. This just makes sure that Primal Strike is 100% vitality damage rather than just the lightning damage. And then we have extra crit damage on Drieg's Evil Eye, more vitality damage on Primal Strike. I actually forgot to mention, hold on, the resistances here. Vitality resistance is okay. Elemental resistance is extremely common, so that's not really a big deal. The Chaos and Bleeding resistance on the Amulet is really nice, especially the increase to your maximum Chaos resistance, which is pretty huge, especially since this set really focuses quite heavily on vitality damage, which is something Chthonics typically resist. So having some extra Chaos resistance to help combat Chthonics is somewhat significant, especially for this set. Then we go into the Mask, which Pierce resistance is really nice. I find a lot of the time Elemental resistance, again, it's kind of okay. And then finally, we have the Shoulder Guards, which is really nice. They're very basic. The Aether resistance is really nice. Bleeding resistance, of course, is nice. More power to Primal Strike. Delightful. That's great. But running this, I usually use, obviously we're going to be using Drieg's Evil Eye. I usually use Focus Gaze. Obviously we're going into Possession. That goes without saying. Obviously we're going into Primal Strike. Here we go. Boom. Delightful. Now, when I run the Rotgeist focused build, I'm usually going to go, personally, obviously, for Blood of Drieg, right? You're getting that Vitality, Poison Acid increase, very useful. It's a beautiful self-heal. You can stun some fools, heal in between, you're pretty much golden. Now, the remainder of how I build this really depends upon what other pieces of equipment I'm using, because the Rotgeist is only 4 items, right? Obviously you need a two-handed weapon for Primal Strike, whether it's ranged or melee is entirely up to you, but that does also somewhat change how I approach this. See, even with ranged, Blood of Drieg is really nice as a heal, but if I'm going to be ranged, I typically utilize Bloody Pox, because then I can stun my enemies from a distance, slap Bloody Pox on them, and then throw an eyeball, stun them again, throw another eyeball, and basically between these 3 skills, you can very quickly deteriorate enemy health very rapidly, with a couple of exceptions. Another nice thing about Bloody Pox is it incorporates bleeding damage, which, again, not a whole lot of enemies are resistant to, especially if they happen to be resistant to Vitality. Now, bleeding and poison acid resistance are they do kind of exist together, I've noticed over time. Enemies that are resistant to poison acid will usually have some moderate to somewhat weakish resistance to bleeding damage, so, and of course heroes and bosses, it really depends on the individual hero and boss, so you will find occasionally some hero, some boss, that'll just be really resistant to your damage types here, but that's pretty much inevitable. And most of the time, these are going to be Chthonic heroes anyways, so there's really not a whole lot you can do about that, unfortunately. But if I'm ranged, I'm usually going to go into Bloody Pox, because I can chain stun with Primal Strike, and then just alternate between these 2, busting out those 2. Now, otherwise, whether you're ranged or you're melee, you've got a couple of very interesting options here. You could go into Storm Totem, use Corrupted Storm. I don't usually. If I'm melee, I'm usually going to go into Wendigo Totem and Blood Pact. It's a little less useful for ranged, because with Primal Strike, it's a lot harder for most enemies to get to you, except for the stun immune ones, and even then, at that particular point, you have Blood of Drieg anyways, so it's not like you have an absolutely overwhelming need for extra healing, but if you're melee, it's a little bit of a different story. You actually will want some more additional healing, and Wendigo Totem, especially with Blood Pact, can really help you out with that. And it's just incredibly useful in that particular regard. So if I'm melee, I'm usually going to go with Wendigo Totem at the very least. If I'm ranged, I'm going to usually go with Bloody Pox, if I'm looking to be skill-focused. If you decide not to be skill-focused, you actually can make an extremely effective auto-attacking build with Savagery, especially with Might of the Bear. Tenacity, Storm Touched. And then you can go into Slail's Witchfire and Second Right. And if you're feeling particularly spicy, you can put some points into Brute Force as well. But this is also not the only way you can approach this, right? You could, alternatively... Actually, you know what I might do here is actually go full into the points here for a hot second, so you can really see what's going on here. Because obviously we have Primal Strike, and please, for the love of all things good and evil, don't go into Thunder Strike. It takes away your beautiful stun. So we have all of these, we have all of these, we have all of these, right? And we'll pull these out temporarily. But if I'm ranged, I'm usually going to go into Bloody Pox. And at this particular point, you've got some spare points that you can throw in. Whether you put this into Blood of Drieg for the extra damage or not is totally up to you. If you do, you can actually pull this all the way back over here, right? You can finish this up here with very little trouble. You have an extra point. Put it in here for some extra attributes, or what have you. So you have that option there. That's usually what I'll do with ranged. Again, even though you aren't necessarily building this for the retaliation, you're mostly building this for the healing and the resistances, as well as the damage boost. Because even ranged characters do get hit a decent amount of the time by ranged enemies. So you have to have some form of being able to take care of yourself. And with medium defensive ability with 15% damage absorption here, you do have to kind of be careful about that. So, if I'm melee, again, as I stated before, I'm usually going to go into Wendigo Totem instead. And you'll notice here, because it doesn't take as many points as Bloody Pox, you actually have enough points to go into Blood of Drieg without having to remove points out of Shaman. You've got 5 points left over. Again, you could put them into the attribute points. You could put them into Mogdragon's Pact, which is never a completely bad idea. You've got a couple of options there. Now, at any given point, also keep in mind that you can swap either of these out for Sigil of Consumption, because keep in mind that Bloody Pox, while it does a lot of damage, doesn't do anything for your control. Pull these out while I'm talking. Doesn't do anything for any kind of crowd control, but these actually can act as an excellent deterrent. And the only reason why I use, really, Bloody Pox over Sigil of Consumption is Sigil of Consumption can't be put that far away from you. So, unlike Bloody Pox, which can spread well beyond your average range, Sigil of Consumption can't. So, it is something of a trade-off there. And you could, if you're melee, replace Wendigo Totem with Sigil of Consumption as well. Again, this is mostly going to depend on your itemization. If you have items that increase Sigil of Consumption, obviously it would be better to use Sigil of Consumption. Otherwise, Wendigo Totem is a little bit better, because personally, I just find that it heals me more consistently, because it's going to do the life tap, then it's going to mend wounds. It's going to life tap, then it's going to mend wounds. The main reason, though, is Wendigo Totem's healing is not reliant upon dealing damage. It will heal you, doesn't care what the enemy's doing. So, if you come up against a vitality-resistant enemy, Wendigo Totem will still heal you the same amount. Sigil of Consumption won't. If you come up against a hero or a boss that's resistant to vitality damage, and or resistant to chaos or fire damage, which is going to be, I mean, Chthonics alone are primarily resistant to vitality damage, among other damage types. So, Sigil of Consumption becomes riskier in that particular regard, where you are now able to heal moderately well off of everything except Chthonics. Now, you are going to probably have Blood of Drieg available to you if you need it, but I just find Wendigo Totem to be more consistent for healing purposes, which is what the melee will really be looking for. But of course, you've got the potential to go into Savagery as well. Put delicious points there. Right, and then we go all the way here. You pull these points back. And then you go into Slail's Witchfire. And the last point's into Second Right. It's not as important to finish Second Right. You lose a little bit of resistance. You lose a little bit of damage. But it is very important, if you are going to go with Savagery, that you at least get Slail's Witchfire to maximum because that's increased attack speed, which means you're hitting them more often with savagery. Now, you don't necessarily need to go into savagery. You could also just as easily go into brute force. This would actually allow you to build second right because you're not putting 3 points here. And these last two are 10, these two are 12, this is 16. You could splash points into another skill such as Devouring Swarm if you decide to use brute force instead. I don't always necessarily go for this, it really depends. It is actually a really effective setup because it does diversify your damage output a little bit, because the Rotgeist set doesn't convert 100% of your lightning damage. It's going to be converting, what is it, 50% roughly? Minimum 50% of your lightning damage is being converted to vitality. The other 50% is actually not a bad thing to have because, again, Chthonics are really going to be resistant to you, so having a little bit of lightning damage, which not all Chthonics are resistant to, is actually going to be a really good thing. Actually, the only Chthonics you'll really have a problem with under a savagery build, specifically, are the lightning Chthonics. Beyond that, your lightning damage will actually do you some good there. But it is something you have to personally decide. You can use the auto-attack focused build, either the Savagery plus Slail's Witchfire, or the Upheaval plus Slail's Witchfire, or the Upheaval plus Savagery, whichever one you prefer. You can use either of these with ranged or melee. I personally don't combine Brute Force with Savagery, the full ones, because you don't get the attack speed benefit of Slail's Witchfire. Both of the other two skills really benefit from Slail's Witchfire. It just really depends on if you want to do with some extra lightning and bleed damage, or if you want Feral Hunger for a little bit of extra attack damage conversion. So that really depends, and that's going to depend on what other items you have equipped. Again, there is some variety there. And any spare points that you can either put into attributes, or you could go into Devouring Swarm, which reduces enemy vitality resistance and bleeding resistance. Now, the bleeding resistance is interesting, because not only does it benefit Primal Strike, because you'll actually notice if you paid attention to the actual set here, that only the lightning and the physical damage are being converted. The bleeding damage of Primal Strike is not being converted into vitality damage. That remains exactly the same. Therefore, utilizing the Devouring Swarm is actually very effective, especially if you do decide to go into Savagery and or Brute Force, both of which deal, at some point, bleeding damage. This does bleeding damage here, this does bleeding damage here, and that's about it. I thought this increased bleeding damage as well. I must have forgotten. No, it's physical damage. That's what I was confusing with. But this actually can really help you if you do decide to go into the Savagery combination, specifically the Savagery Slail's Witchfire combination, which is also doing a lot of vitality damage as well. Furthermore, of course, Drieg's Evil Eye does vitality damage. If you're ranged and you decide to go into Bloody Pox, this does vitality and bleeding damage, obviously. It does Poison Acid at the end, but you do have all of these really fantastic options. So there are a variety of ways you can really approach this, but do not ever go into Thunderous Strike, because even though you're converting Primal Strike's damage types, you still keep the stun. So you can still absolutely decimate people with that, and furthermore, on top of that, there's actually a mild change you can do here. There's a slightly different variety. I usually go into Possession with this, but you can do a hybrid pet build very effectively. And that's primarily going to be through the use of Primal Bond, which increases physical, internal trauma, and bleeding damage. Now again, Primal Strike retains its bleeding damage. And you can go into the Briarthorn instead. The reason why I don't usually do this is because Drieg's Evil Eye is not really gaining any benefit from this. But on the other hand, you will have a little bit of an easier time with Chthonics, and you get the benefit of the Briarthorn as well. If I am going to be running a Primal Bond, I am going to be running it ranged, because I really want to be able to stun my enemies from range, have my Briarthorn there, etc. I'm also more likely to use this in a group setting if I'm playing with other people, because if I'm ranged, which is the ideal here, so your Briarthorn can tank for you, you're not necessarily getting the benefit of Emboldening Presence if you decide to go for that. You don't have to. And if you are going to go solo ranged, Emboldening Presence isn't worth it, honestly. But if you're looking to be a ranged Primal Bond Conjurer with the Rotgeist build, and you want a Briarthorn, and you want Emboldening Presence, save it for when you're working with other people, because your allies, who are at least hopefully one of whom is going to be melee, can gain the benefit of emboldening presence. But if you're going solo and you're ranged, it's not worth it. You can do this melee, obviously. I'm not saying you shouldn't use this melee. If you are going melee with a Briarthorn with this setup, definitely go emboldening presence. That'll really help your damage output. And definitely go with Wendigo Totem because it'll heal both you and your Briarthorn, making it very difficult to kill either of you. It's very potent, actually. Quite impressive in terms of damage output. And while you two are fending off the enemy, you've got Drieg's Evil Eye going on here. So, but basically what you would run with this is Primal Strike, throw a Drieg's Evil Eye, slap down a Wendigo Totem, this is off cooldown, Primal Strike again, throw another Eyeball because this is off cooldown, Wendigo Totem again. You'll notice that this has a 3-second recharge, this is a 4-second recharge, this is a 5-second recharge. Boink, boink, boink. You just continuously cycle through the 3 abilities. You're not even using your weapon to attack. You're holding this giant weapon of whatever variety just for damage increases. You don't actually hit anyone with it under this. But that's usually, if I am going to go with a pet build with Rotgeist, this is how I'm going to go. A really beautiful hybrid build. Again, whether or not you use Emboldening Presence is whether or not you're solo. If you're solo and you're ranged, don't bother. In every other situation, it's really worth having. If you are also going to use the Briarthorn, you're working with other people, it might be worth going into Mogdragon's Pact. Otherwise, I often don't find the need to, because the combination of the Wendigo Totem, the Primal Strike, almost complete chain stun, and Drieg's Evil Eye will eliminate a lot of enemies for you with very little difficulty, but that's generally how I approach the Rotgeist, and you can easily see why this is my absolute favorite build that I've used with this, that I've seen used. I'm recreating it again now. Currently, I'm in the process of doing that, and it's just absolutely insanely glorious, and I love it so much. It's just an absolutely fantastic set of items, in all honesty. It's just delightful. So that's easily one of my favorite setups to use for the Conjurer, whether or not you want to go ranged or melee. But now let's move on to the Wildheart Vanguard. Now this I do sometimes use with the Conjurer. Not a whole lot of the time. I haven't used it in quite a while. Actually, for note, this could potentially be utilized with the Rotgeist. To some extent, you don't get the shoulders here, so you only will get up to the 2 set here, but you can use some aspects of it. I don't usually, because they do kind of, even though they, on one hand, do actually coordinate, on the other hand, I'm not necessarily sure as you can see from how cleanly the points were put away in the previous build, I don't really have a whole lot of spare points to put into Grasping Vines and Devouring Swarm, but as an individual standalone set, if you want to focus around it, this is actually really excellent. It's only got a couple of problems. Namely, it doesn't specifically enhance anything that the Occultist is doing specifically, but you will notice all kinds of benefits. Bleeding damage, obviously, Grasping Vines, extra bleeding damage, it's obviously bleeding damage, but the actual individual pieces increase vitality damage, and by an impressive amount. Furthermore, you get extra vitality damage for Devouring Swarm, which means, hey, Devouring Swarm is actually really nice. Now, this is actually the most interesting part of this set here, and there's not a whole lot of necessarily huge contexts to Life Leech resistance, but there are some secret bosses, I use that term loosely, that actually use Life Leech a decent amount of the time, so actually this becomes quite useful at the end game, which is really good because it's a level 94 set, but at the end game, this set really comes into its own, and you can really see a lot of the benefits here. The resistances on this set, you can see we have pretty standard elemental resistance, meh. The bleeding resistance is nice. The maximum bleeding resistance is even more nice. We have a nice increase to Wendigo Totem here, which is really appreciated, and I'll tell you why in a bit. And then here we have more elemental resistance, meh, and some decent poison acid resistance, which is nice. But when you actually approach this particular set from the Conjurer standpoint, obviously we're going into Wendigo Totem, that goes without saying, right? And then we go Grasping Vines, obviously. Entangling Vines. Devouring Swarm. Now, when I approach this set, there are a couple of things that I run with. First off, I am usually running this melee. I don't really like playing this ranged. As nice as the slow is on grasping vines, it is a matter of time before the enemy moves out of the grasping vines to get into melee with you, and at that point, you're throwing down the vines. It's just a pain in the neck. I usually use this melee because I can slap down a Wendigo totem, I can slap down the vines, and I'm doing a lot of damage over time, and I'm just beating on them with my regular attacks. And I'm throwing out the occasional Devouring Swarm to keep their resistances down, right? I will almost always, with this set, run Bloody Pox, and only Bloody Pox. It does exactly the damage types that the set is increasing, Vitality and Bleeding. Devouring Swarm really benefits from this. It puts in a splash of poison damage, so that's really nice. But this is almost exclusively the only thing I will run out of Occultist with this set. But what are your other options? Well, you've got a couple. First off, you can, again, go into Primal Bond. You can grab yourself a nice Briarthorn. And you can, again, usually I use this melee, so I'm usually busting out Emboldening Presence. And then my last few points I will spend on Mogdragon's Pact for just a little bit of health regeneration. Mostly the energy regeneration, because as you can see, again, we're cycling through abilities here, Wendigo Totem into Grasping Vines, into Devouring Swarm, or any variety you prefer to use that with. My actual order is Devouring Swarm, Wendigo Totem, Grasping Vines, throw out a single Bloody Pox, rinse and repeat these three, and every third cycle I'll run another Bloody Pox just to refresh that, because it lasts for a decent amount of time on any survivors. You know, I'll just run that occasionally. You don't want to use Bloody Pox too often. I've found it's less effective if you spam it. Or at least it doesn't make any noticeable difference if you spam it. So this is usually how I will approach this class in one version. This is the hybrid build. Other options are actually to, instead of going with the Briarthorn, you can go into Primal Strike, one of my favorite skills once again, because it is focused on bleeding damage. Now, this isn't something I do quite as often because, again, the Briarthorn is really nice to have. Emboldening Presence is a huge help, especially if you're going melee. But the lightning damage out of Primal Strike, again, is going to really help you against Chthonics. Although you have the bleeding damage, which Chthonics generally aren't too resistant to. So the bleeding damage actually will help you out a lot of the time. And of course, you've got your physical damage for some extent of it. Or you could go with an auto-attack build, again, Savagery, but this time it's actually worth going Brute Force and Savagery here a lot of the time, because you can really take advantage of the bleeding that happens here. But then you can also still go into, if you really want to, you can still go into Sell's Witchfire. That's totally up to you. But I usually will go hybrid on this one, unlike the previous one where I don't always go hybrid. This one is something I usually go hybrid with, because the Briarthorn plus the Grasping Vines plus the Wendigo Totem and Emboldening Presence, it's just magnificent. It's absolutely fantastic. But that's how I'll usually approach a Conjurer using the Wildheart Vanguard. Again, I don't use this combination a whole lot with that set. I haven't used it in a while, so my information here is slightly outdated. I might, upon testing this in the future, make some mild adjustments, personally. But this is how I used to... If only I could right-click fast. This is how I used to run it, and it's always been very effective for me. But there's, as you can see, not a ton of interaction here between the Occultist part with the Wildheart Vanguard set. Anyways, on to the next set, the Valgar's Hunger. Now, this is another one of those sets that is fairly interesting from the perspective of late game, because we have 100% life leech resistance, which is more useful than you think at the end game. And of course, we have increases to Sigil of Consumption and Storm Totem. Now, personally, that's fine. But then we get into the actual items here. And I'm going to be honest, I have used this set once with the Conjurer, but I'm usually going to use this with some variety of Necromancer instead, and replace one of the other of these with Necromancer. But I have used this once with the Conjurer, And frankly, I found it somewhat limiting because, as you've been probably noticing for the past 2 builds, or the past 2 set focuses, the ability to wield two-handed, and in fact the emphasis on two-handed weapons, has given you a lot of good variety in terms of your actual damage output for auto-attack focused builds, but because this set includes an offhand, that's a little less available. Now, the set's still good. You're still doing impressive amounts of damage with Sigil of Consumption, and with Storm Totem, of course. And you've got all of this loveliness here. That's fine. But there are a couple of problems that I personally have with the set. First, before I go into my problems with the set, I do want to talk about the resistances of the set, or the actual rough lack thereof. First off, obviously, the offhand has none. That's not unusual. We have Pierce resistance here, which is good. A very low physical resistance, which is okay. Not the best I've seen. We have Aether resistance, which is really nice here. Elemental resistance, which is very common. And this only has the 1 resistance boost, which you'll notice is a little unusual. If you've been paying attention to the resistance boosts of other armor pieces, a lot of these boost roughly 2 resistances. So the fact that this only boosts 1 kind of hurts this individual piece here. And second off, it is fairly important to note that chaos damage is being converted to vitality damage, which is okay, except for one small problem. We're also converting lightning damage to vitality damage. Now, what specifically are my problems with the Valgar's Hunger set? At least in the context of the Conjurer. What are my issues? I have 2 specific issues with this. First off, the focus on Sigil of Consumption, as I mentioned earlier, means that your main source of self-heal here is not going to be very effective against Chthonics. You're just not going to be healing that much against Chthonics. My second actual problem with the set is specifically here and here, the conversion of chaos damage to vitality damage. My problem with that is specifically in the first half of the Ashes of Malmouth campaign, where you're fighting the cannibals. The cannibals are the one group in the game with pretty decent vitality and bleeding resistance. The previous 2 sets have had ways around that. Poison acid damage, lightning damage, what have you. But this is so hardcore focused on vitality damage and bleeding damage without any kind of avenues, without any consistently useful avenues into non-vitality damage, that you will find that you will have a very hard time with the cannibals in the Gloomwald and Ogdenburg. It can get pretty ugly. And furthermore, of course, as usual, the Chthonics rear their ugly head. Because you don't have a lot of options here, especially when you have to use an offhand for this particular set, which means you don't have access to Primal Strike, which is one of the very few good counters that this combination has to such villains. You've basically only got Savagery, which isn't going to be nearly as effective because you're running a offhand, and you'll notice that Savagery pulls a decent amount off of your weapon damage. So you're using a single-hand weapon for Savagery, so this isn't going to slap quite as hard. So your actual avenues of getting around vitality resistance are not many. You basically only have Possession going... Well, Possession is something you're going to want with this combination anyways, but that's beside the point. Or Drieg's Evil Eye. This is your one avenue around Chthonics and the cannibals, because of the poison acid damage. And either one of these groups can just produce their poison and acid resistant hero, and you're in some pretty deep trouble. Okay, this is my problem with Valgar's Hunger, with the Conjurer set specifically, which is why I've only used it once. I just don't really like this specific combination when using Valgar's Hunger. Personal preference. Again, alternatively, you can go into Primal Bond, of course, because we are boosting bleeding damage. Primal Bond, go into Briarthorn, Emboldening Presence, which does help to some extent. Of course, you go into Wendigo Totem. as well, but still you don't have a ton of options. Actually, one of the more effective things I've found, and this was through sweat, blood, and tears, was actually to run Emboldening Presence, Primal Bond, and these, and then go into Savagery, utilizing the Briarthorn's Emboldening Presence, to actually boost my damage with this to some actually decent degree. And then I pulled back these points, and what I did was I put points into Bloody Pox here, and I used, what's his name? Balrog's Arm, I think. It's the first boss. I don't think his name is Balrog, actually, but whatever his name is, I can't remember his name off the top of my head. But you know the guy I'm talking about, the very first boss, the red, ethereal mutant that you fight in the game in Lower Crossing. Him. His arm. Balrog's Arm. Balrog's Arm is a single-hand weapon, green, that can scale all the way up to level 94 at Legendary, and it enhances Savagery and Bloody Pox, and it increases the bleeding damage of both of these. Alright? I found that to be very effective with this set. I still don't like this set with Conjurer, but it's manageable. It's just not the best thing I've seen. It's for Conjurer very mediocre, but I did find Balrog's Arm to be very useful with this set, because at the very least, the percentage reduction to enemy health at least helped getting around the enemies that were resistant to the Vitality Bleeding combination, and of course, the increase in damage through 2 Savagery was quite a lifesaver. It was still tough, though, because Savagery still only really hits one target at most. No matter where you go along here, it's only a single target slap. So it is still somewhat tough to get through, but for reference, I don't usually reference equipment outside of the sets that I'm focusing on, but this was such a rough time for me, and I distinctly remember busting out Balrog's Arm to help with this, because it was just a terrible time. It is not one of my favorite sets to use with the Conjurer. It's only rough specifically against Chthonics and against the cannibals in Ogdenbog and Gloomwald. The rest of the time, you are going to have an absolute field day. Don't get me wrong. It's just that when you're coming up, you're going through campaigns, and you obviously have to go through a variety of enemies. Even if you're going to the Shattered Realm, you're going to be encountering random enemies, and this still is going to be a problem at some point. So, I just want you to be aware of the fact that while you can use this set with the Conjurer, and the Conjurer can do some nice things, I mean, yes, busting out an extra Storm Totem is nice and all, but it's just not worth it. I mean, it's very tough to use, and there's going to be people who can say, well, you can just leave the Lightning conversion, just don't bust out the Storm, just don't convert the Storm Totem. Sure, you can do that, but you're still relying upon a Storm Totem to do so much extra damage for you. And you're not increasing lightning damage either, whereas with at least Balrog's Arm, you're increasing your bleeding damage and you're increasing Savagery's, the amount of points in Savagery as well, so that really helps. But that's what I found. I mean, I tried using just the regular Storm Totem, and it just was not enough damage. Yes, it was very accurate. Yes, I could bust out a bunch of extra Storm Totems, and against regular enemies, it was perfectly effective, but you come up against a hero or a boss that's sufficiently resistant to Vitality, which is, again, most Chthonics and Cannibals, or any hero, you're going to have a really ugly time. So I'm not really a huge fan of Valgar's Hunger with this specific set. I much prefer it with the Necromancer Shaman, because you have access to Aether damage in that particular instance, which is a huge help, because neither the Cannibals nor the Chthonics resist Aether well. So you have access to that Aether damage that you can circumvent that Vitality resistance. And I'll talk about that combination in a future video. Right now we're focusing on the Conjurer, but I do usually use this with the Necromancer just for that Aether damage, because it's such a big help. But anyways, moving on. We have Ultos' Tempest. Now, this one's fairly interesting in that there's very little that you're actually going to be doing with the Occultist. I forgot what it was called for a second there. Now, obviously, it has my favorite item of Primal Strike, right? Primal Strike everywhere. You've got just Primal Strike out the wazoo. Stormcaller's Pact, it's fantastic, right? Savagery, yes, absolutely fantastic. When I run this, I'm usually just running the Summon Familiar. That's it. And that's specifically for the heal and the increase in elemental damage, right? Because you'll notice, really went gung-ho on that. Down here, you have a really substantial increase in Stormcaller's Pact. So while some people would be tempted, hey, Primal Bond. While Primal Bond can work, I actually find, even if I'm going to be going into the Briarthorn, Stormcaller's Pact is just much better, because you can use both your pets as a form of damage boost. So you go into Savagery, obviously, and this is a two-handed weapon setup, so we're going to go into that. Nasty the Boar. Storm Touched. Great. Primal Strike, here we come. Boom. Torrent, boom. Storm Surge, boom. Alright. Now, Summon Briarthorn. Actually, we can go a little bit different. Forgot how many points this is. Pull out the Lightning Strike. You don't really need it, because all you want the Crow for is a damage boost. Boom. And glorious. And then you just put in 4 points here. And you just stun, hit him 3 times with Savagery, or depending on your attack speed, 4 times. Stun, slap, slap, slap. Stun, slap, slap, slap. Your Crow will keep you alive through healing on those occasions you need to, usually. That's a bit inconsistent, so just keep an eye on that. Use health potions as needed, obviously. Your Briarthorn is boosting your damage and taunting enemies, so their focus isn't entirely on you. The Briarthorn obviously has some good stuns, and it's just absolutely fantastic. And both your, even though this is technically a hybrid build, this is really focused around you. Your pets are really existing in this build to boost you. Now, you don't have to go with the Briarthorn. You can absolutely go with Brute Force, and there is an excellent argument to be made that Brute Force can, in fact, heal you more, so there is that, but I just personally have always found the Briarthorn to be a little bit more useful overall, because he can taunt the enemies by generating additional threat, thereby pulling away a lot of the attention from you in case you really need it. Now, that's not terribly often, because you are chain stunning a whole bunch of fools with Primal Strike, so it's not really a big concern, but you could go into Brute Force instead of the Briarthorn as well. And really, the Crow is just, you should probably pick up the Crow, at the very least, because the Crow is absolutely phenomenal. If you really wanted to, you could instead go into Curse of Frailty and or Vulnerability as well to decrease enemy resistances. Curse of Frailty is actually not a bad idea. You could put your last 4 points into that instead, but you don't need to. It's entirely up to you how you want to run that. But the Crow, Storm Surge, and Primal Strike are generally where you're going to want to go, because even with all those stuns, it's inevitable that you're not going to stun everyone. There are going to be enemies that are immune to stuns, there are going to be enemies that won't be stunned for that long and get in a cheap shot or two, and your Crow is going to be able to heal that back up, which is why usually the Crow is enough to heal you, when in a lot of other builds it wouldn't be. But you have the chain stun of Primal Strike, and of course Primal Strike isn't perfect. There's going to be the occasional moments where it's not going to stun someone, or the enemy gets unstunned before Primal Strike is off cooldown, because it's only, the minimum stun is 2.4 seconds, up to I think 6. What was the stun maximum? 4, not 6. I don't know where I'm pulling 6 from. But up to 4, so you've got that leeway where either they're going to be stunned until you get your next Primal Strike, or maybe they're unstunned for a bit beforehand and get in an attack or two, depending on their attack speed. And your Crow will take care of most of that. The Briarthorn is a matter of personal opinion. I just personally prefer that. But Upheaval and Brute Force and Feral Hunger really work, especially if you're having a bit of a hard time surviving. With the Briarthorn, that really works out well. Or possibly if you're having a hard time killing enemies, maybe go into Curse of Frailty. Both Primal Strike and Savagery do physical damage and bleeding damage, so Curse of Frailty is really nice in that context. So just things to think about in that particular regard, but you know, it's not a very complicated set. There's not a whole lot necessarily going on here. Lots of lightning damage, physical damage being converted. You know, fantastic. You've got the good old granted skill here of Ultos' Wrath. which happens at, whenever you get a critical, which is just extra lightning damage, which is fantastic. And you've got all of these, +2 to all of your shaman skills. It's just very much a, obviously, shaman-focused build, which is why you only really pull out the crow here, because it's the only real benefit you need. But I am really fond of that set, even though it's just like the previous set, where the previous set was focused exclusively on shaman skills. This set focuses also exclusively on shaman skills, but you've got your crow, and the reason why I like this set more than the previous one is because Ultos' Tempest deals physical, to some extent, lightning, and bleeding. So anything that resists your lightning is going to have a hard time against the bleeding in most cases. Again, there are the rare exceptions in specific heroes, specific bosses. That's fine, because you have got your crow to heal you if you need it, and chances are you might be able to still stun them. Again, it depends on the individual. A lot of bosses can't be stunned, but there's a decent number of heroes that can be stunned. So, really, there are going to be rare exceptions where you have a hard time, but the bleeding damage will cover what the lightning is resisted by, and vice versa. So, it's not as much of a concern, unlike the previous set. Now, we've got Trozan's skybreach. This one, I have not really actually used a whole lot. I've used this exactly once, and I did not like it. And this is mostly because I don't like Wind Devil. I'm going to be really honest. It's one of my least favorite skills in the game. So I used this once for testing purposes because I was curious. Maybe this will change my mind on Wind Devil. It did not, at least not with the Conjurer combination. It's much more effective with the Arcanist. I will give you that. But I'm just not fond of this with the Conjurer because, again, you're not really doing a ton necessarily with this. Now, this does have actually a couple of interesting facets to it. First off, you do have the Fallen Comet, which is actually really nice, to be completely honest. That's absolutely fantastic. Second off, you have the very interesting aspect of the cold damage Sigil of Consumption, which actually does some interesting things for you. So first off, when you're running the Trozan's skybreach with the Occultist, you are obviously going to go into that. I also typically go into the Familiar. Again, we're looking for that elemental damage, right? Storm Spirit at the very least. Pull back these points because we don't need all these points here. Come on, there you go. And then you are just generally going to want to go into, obviously, the Wind Devil. Also, you obviously want to go into Stormcaller's Pact. And the main issue I had with this, well, there's two issues. Beyond using Wind Devil, one of my least favorite skills, again, that's a matter of personal opinion. I'm sure there's people out there screaming that Wind Devil is amazing. I feel you. You know, there's skills that I'm abnormally fond of that other people don't like. I know my feelings towards Alexa's Flash Freeze are very unpopular. I will die on that hill, though. Anyways, so obviously, you do want Stormcaller's Pact, good old Sigil of Consumption, Wind Devil. The main problem, other problem that I have with this is that this is a one-handed weapon as part of the set. And although this has really nice Aether resistance, again, this is a piece of armor with only one resistance. Up here, you will also notice that we've got some very mild physical resistance, some decent vitality resistance, that's fine. Chaos resistance, that's good. Elemental resistance, fairly mediocre. The armor set itself isn't hugely big on the resistances. I forgot to mention that with the last set. Did I? I can't remember. I'm rolling like a train out here. But, you know, it's just, you can summon all these Wind Devils, but basically what you're running here is this. Right? And maybe you go into Storm Totem, right? Maybe you don't. I don't know. You can go into Storm Totem, you can go into Savagery. You can go into a combination of Storm Totem and give your Raven the Lightning Strike, which actually is fairly effective because Lightning Strike can stun the enemy, which you can't do because you don't have a two-handed weapon, so you can't use Primal Strike. So actually, what would be better actually would be a Lightning Strike here, some Storm Totems here, and then you would probably want to use Mogdragon's Pact for some extra durability, because you are going to have a bit of a rough time. Now, the reason why you're going to have a rough time is because you're converting Sigil of Consumption from Vitality and Chaos damage into, well, actually, specifically, it's not Vitality and Chaos damage. You are converting it specifically from Vitality, Chaos, and... yeah, you are. You're converting it to Lightning and Cold damage. This is a problem because more enemies are resistant to elemental damage than they are to Chaos and Vitality. Chaos and Vitality are resisted by the Chthonic faction, obviously. The Vitality damage is resisted by the Cannibals, and there are sporadic enemies in the Forgotten Gods that are resistant to one or the other. Alright? But the amount of enemies that are resistant to cold and lightning damage, you've got a decent number of ethereal enemies, because, especially in Malmoth, well, at least a quarter of your enemies are going to be resistant to some element. Because ethereals come basically in 5 varieties. One of the 3 elements, cold, fire, lightning, physical, or poison. And poison becomes increasingly rare as you go along, basically. So it mostly comes down to one of the 3 elements or physical. And of course, 2 of those elemental enemies are cold and lightning, who are going to be resistant to cold and lightning. So against ethereal enemies, you're going to have a rough time healing off of that, which is why the crow is really nice. It's why I usually include the crow here. But, well, let me rephrase it. That's why I used the crow when I used this the one time. Let me actually be more actually accurate here. So you've got the crow to kind of compensate for that, but now you're relying on the rather unreliable crow to heal you, which is okay. And you're being resisted by a decent number of ethereals. You're being resisted by all the Yeti enemies in the Astrakarn Mountains. You've got random enemies from Forgotten Gods, but that's pretty much most scenarios anyways. So it's basically converting what group you have a problem with. You are going from having a problem with Chthonics to having an issue with ethereals. It's no different. You're just trading off which group you're having an issue with. Now, this might matter if you're working with friends and somebody's going into a vitality-focused occultist and needs someone to kind of do a different damage type, in which case, fine. Or you're playing with a necromancer ally, and they just really are going to have a hard time because they want to focus on some vitality build. Perfectly fine. So there are contexts in which this makes sense in at least a multiplayer setting, but for single player, which is about half of what I play, it's often not worth it. I'm going to be really honest. For this combination, for the Conjurer, it's just not worth it. It makes a little more sense for the Occultist Arcanist combination, because then you can splash in some actual chaos damage in there through the use of, what is it called? A Fabric of Reality from Arcanist, and then you can splash some chaos damage in there, splash some aether damage in there, and you can come out ahead still, even with the converted Sigil of Consumption, utilizing Star Pact especially. So you have that option. Or, alternatively, you can use Trozan's skybreach with the combination of the Arcanist and the Shaman, although this faces, as you can imagine, similar problems. It's just that with the elemental reduction provided by the Wind Devil, which is nice, by the way, right? It's actually a pretty decent amount it reduces. We have 30% here, and then throughout the actual set, you not only can summon an additional Wind Devils, you have how many of these flying around again? 4. Oops. So you have 4 Wind Devils flying around, reducing resistances, and I think they decrease resistance even more. Where is that? Didn't they? I could have sworn that this set provides you with, yes, an additional 10% elemental resistance. So they're reducing enemy elemental resistance by 40%, which is nice, which does really help a lot. I just really don't like Wind Devils. So there is that. It's a very okay set, but it's a lot of the time I just find that this set just changes your dreaded enemy type from Chthonics to Ethereals a lot of the time, and Yetis. It's just not something I'm terribly fond of. Like I said, I have played this once. technically 1.5 times. I just didn't finish it the second time because I hated it. I hate Wind Devils. So it's just something that's basically what the Conjurer is doing in this particular context, is going from hating chthonics and their existence to hating ethereals. That's basically all that's happening. And while the Wind Devil's elemental resistance drop does help, they don't last forever, unlike some other elemental unlike other quasi-pets that reduce resistances, Guardian of Empyrean. That comparatively, they're just, I find them loathsome. So, I just don't like the combination with Trozan skybreach. So, onto the Harbinger's message. Now, this is another fairly interesting one, and this is focused purely on the Occultist, and you can see, you've got the extra everything from Doombolt. That's really nice. We've got Doombolt. It's mostly chaos damage. We have possession here. Chaos damage out the wazoo. A two-handed ranged. Keyword two-handed. That'll become important in a hot second. We have second right, of course. So, with second right, now keep in mind that we're boosting Soleil's Witchfire here, right? You have the Harbinger's Mark, which decreases physical damage, okay? This is key, and this is actually why I actually really like this set with the Conjurer. And you've got second right here, okay? Now, normally, when you are also the Harbinger's Aim, which is just beautiful. I forgot about that, actually, for a hot second there. This is also really nice. The passive ones I always forget about. But the reason why I really like the Harbinger's message with the Conjurer is because, at first glance, it's almost 100% chaos damage, and chthonics laugh at you. Correct. They do. But, with this set, let's put the points in. Soleil's Witchfire, right? Yay! Doombolt. Yay! Possession. Yay! Soleil's Witchfire. Plus boosts. Two-handed ranged weapon. Now we're busting out savagery. Right? Now we're busting out Primal Strike. And this actually has... There's a specific reason I chose to use Primal Strike here. Now we're using Brute Force. Hold on, we can get more points by just pulling this back. Because obviously we don't need all of these points. Okay. Delightful. And if you're feeling really spaced, you can go into Consecrated Blade for fun. Anyways, back to the point. There is a specific reason we have Primal Strike here. The stun. Now, normally, the stun alone is fine. But, keep in mind that Doombolt does double damage when directly striking a target. And of course, hitting a moving target is kind of a pain in the neck. So, since we're using a ranged weapon, and the enemy's front line is advancing towards us, especially if it's a hero, a melee enemy hero, or a melee enemy boss, that's a bit problematic. But, you can blast them with Primal Strike from a distance, which, by the way, does physical damage, which we're reducing the resistance of slightly. Hey, hey, hey. Stun them, blast their faces off with a guaranteed hit Doombolt, and while this is recharging, you fire away like a lunatic with your combination of Soleil's Witchfire, Savagery, and Brute Force. This is fantastically devastating, and this is actually the reason why, for the Harbinger's message, this is my favorite combination to use with that, because obviously the Harbinger's message is intended for any combination of Occultist and whatever, but this is one of my favorite ways of running the Harbinger's message, because I do have access to that Primal Strike that I can use from a distance, guaranteed stun. It's a damage type that isn't Vitality or Chaos, so it'll get around most of the Chthonic problem. And you have great options here. While there is a heavy emphasis on chaos in the build, that is true, you can put in enough physical and electric damage through a combination of Primal Strike, Upheaval, Brute Force, I keep calling this Upheaval today for some reason, Brute Force, and Savagery, where you can really not care about the enemy's chaos resistance, even though you are also additionally reducing that by 40%. So in terms of the Conjurer with the Harbinger's message, this is one of my favorite ways to run it. This is absolutely fantastic. I don't even consider pets, not even for a second. It's just, this is basically all I do. Harbinger's message? Okay, here we are. This is the only way I run this, because it's so effective in so many situations. I don't care what you're facing, they're probably doomed. There's, you know, unless you're completely surrounded by lunatic enemies, because you did something silly, like ran ahead and weren't paying attention. I have done that occasionally. But it's absolutely fantastic. It really is hugely powerful. And it's just absolutely phenomenal. And there's very few combinations I like as much with the Harbinger's Message as this one. And the Harbinger's Message I really like because it's only 3 pieces. It's only got, really, it can be used with Occultist plus anything, technically speaking. It's just, and each one of these has a skill attached to it. This has the Mark, this has the Grasp, and this has the Aim. I mean, it's one of my favorite sets to play with. I play with this set a ton. I love this set. But, that being said, we must now move on to the next set, but I gotta undo these points first. But the Harbinger's Message. I mean, it's probably my second favorite set to use with the Conjurer. The Rotgeist is definitely my favorite one, just because of the variety. The Harbinger's Message, for me personally, isn't quite as flexible in my eye, because, again, there's just so much emphasis on the auto-attacks, that to deviate off the auto-attacks is very silly in my eyes. And you just do so much damage with this combination. It's just absolutely fantastic. I love it so much. But the Rotgeist definitely has more variety that you can do with it. It's definitely more customizable to how you want to play. This one, a little less so, just because of all that emphasis on the auto-attacks. Just the boosts to Soleil's Witchfire alone really do wonders for its ability to sustain an auto-attack focused build. Now, the Deception of Drieg, I don't usually use this combination because there's so much increased poison and acid damage that, personally, while you can use it with the Conjurer, I have not used it with the Conjurer personally. I'm going to be really upfront and honest. This is an armor set I have not used with specifically the Shaman. I've used this with other Occultist combinations. I'm rather fond of this with the Nightblade and the Oathkeeper, but I have not personally ever used this with Shaman. So, open discretion here, but I can tell you what I would do, having used the set with other things, but just keep in mind that, and one of the reasons why, actually, I'm going to actually explain to you why I haven't really used this with the Shaman. This is a poison acid boosting set that also boosts vitality. And if you're having flashbacks to the Rotgeist set, yeah, that's mainly why I haven't used this with the Conjurer. Everything that this set does, the Rotgeist set does better, because you can see a lot of the same chains. Now, this one is interesting in having the amulet having a really excellent resistances. The helmet is kind of hit or miss on that. Drieg's command is really nice for just keeping you alive, so there is that benefit. Again, there are better sets for that. And we also have the... I'm losing it. This right here, the Secrets of the Guardian, boosting Chaos, Poison, Vitality. That's really great and all. But that's part of the whole set, pardon me. But this is also another reason why I don't generally go with this. It is a one-handed weapon that is part of the set, whereas Rotgeist doesn't have a weapon attached to it. So you can use a two-handed weapon with the Rotgeist, whereas you're not able to with the Deception of Drieg. It's just not something, and we have Vile Eruption increased here, so it's really more intended for Occultist Necromancer combination anyways. It's not the only combination I've used this with, but, wait, Vile Eruption, that's actually, I'm sorry, I think I'm making a mild, no, Vile Eruption is Occultist, pardon me. Brain cramp there. But, yes, it's just... I'm not actually going to cover this a whole lot, because like I said, the Rotgeist set does everything Deception of Drieg does for Conjurer, but better. There's no real point to playing a Conjurer with Deception of Drieg when you have Rotgeist available to you. So I'm just going to kind of pass over this for that reason. I'll definitely be discussing this set with other combinations that I do actually use it with, but yeah, Rotgeist does everything this does for the Conjurer, but better. At least in my personal opinion. So, moving lightly along, we have the Nature's Call. Now, this one's fairly interesting, and this is, out of all of the sets, one that is purely pet-focused. You've got Bonds of Bysmiel, you have Primal Spirit, you've got Briarthorn, and this is fairly interesting. I want you to think about, well, we'll get to that in a bit, but there's a couple of things you're going to really need to be thinking about here. Now, first off, we have all of this delightful thing. We have the Call of the Beast, which is really nice. Increases your damage as well, which is fairly useful, because you can actually still perform a really effective combination build. Notice that we also have increases to the Hellhound. That's fine. You're going to notice some... also, by the way, huge pet increases here. But where are we going with this? Well, first off, this is fairly obvious. Primal Bond. Fairly obvious. Briarthorn. Now, when you're running a Briarthorn with this set, I usually run this melee. I have 2 reasons for this. Alright? First off, key here is you can have 2 Briarthorns. High. 2 Emboldening Presences. 2 Ground Slams. Absolutely fantastic. The only real downside of this set is the sheer amount of cost that it is. Now, you don't necessarily have to go with Storm Spirit. I actually don't always. I've used this a couple times. This is actually one that I haven't used in a very long time, the Nature's Call Regalia. It's been a while since I've used this. So this is one of the sets that I might be a little bit outdated in my information on, but back when I played it, I didn't actually pull Storm Spirit here. I pulled the Hellhound. I busted out Emberclaw. I busted out Bonds of Bysmiel and Manipulation. Now, the reason why I didn't actually go into Storm Spirit or into Hellfire is because those are really specifically massive increases to elemental damage, which you're not necessarily going to be doing here. It really depends. It is a very expensive set, but, you know, boosting this up, you're really not, as you can see, doing a whole lot of your own damage here, which is mildly problematic. Now, you don't necessarily need to go into Primal Bond. I typically do, because it's just really nice to have. It does boost your pets even more. Obviously, you would use your last 12 points here for Primal Spirit, right? But you don't necessarily have to go quite all the way here with all of this. What I have also, let me rephrase that, what I used to also do is drop these 2, go into, Primal Strike, and Torrent. Although it's not quite as many points in the Torrent as maybe you would want. If you really want to, you can pull out some from Emberclaw. If you really want to, get the 5 targets, chain stun everyone here. But yes, as you can see, the main problem with this build is it's very expensive point-wise. You could actually, if you really wanted to, skip the familiar. It does, I usually use the familiar, or let me rephrase that, I used to really use the healer because that was, I'm sorry, not the healer, the Raven, because it was healing me and my guys, but it's not strictly necessary. You can go into Storm Surge for some extra bleeding damage if you really feel like it. Actually, I think it would probably be better to take a couple of points out of Conjure Primal Spirit, because that's temporary, to add some more bleeding damage to Storm Surge. But this is usually how I will roll with this, some small variety of that. I really appreciate the stun with my pets, personally. You could drop more points out of Emberclaw if you really wanted to for more Primal Spirit, or you could drop more points out of Primal Spirit to go into more Emberclaw. It really depends on how you feel about the Primal Spirit. I'm not the biggest fan of the Primal Spirit since it went down to 20 seconds, but back in the day when I used this originally, the Primal Spirit was permanent, and it was way more worthwhile having points in Primal Spirit. So nowadays, I can see me taking points out of Primal Spirit to increase my Hellhound more, because my Hellhound is permanent. I just punched my mic, I apologize. My Hellhound is permanent, and my Primal Spirit no longer is. So there is that conversation that I haven't personally tested yet. That's why I wanted to give the warning on this set that my information might be a little outdated, because back when I played this combination, back when I played the Nature's Call Regalia, the Primal Spirit was a permanent creature. You would summon the one, boom, he just was there. Now he only lives for 20 seconds, so it's not quite as useful as it used to be. So that does somewhat change my perspective now than it did back then. So to some extent, well, I did use the 2 Briarthorns, Emboldening Presence, Hellhound, Emberclaw, Bonds of Bysmiel, Manipulation, all that. And I at least experimented with Primal Strike up the Torrent, and I also experimented with the familiar with the heal. I had the Primal Spirit back in the day at full, and probably today I wouldn't necessarily go there because, again, it is temporary, which really hurts it. So, just something to keep in mind. But that is something I haven't recently tested, so that's going to be something you're going to have to personally test. But that's how I used to build for this particular set from way back in the day. I can't remember when they made the pet change. I think it was late last year. I can't remember when I first read that. Anyways. But yeah, a big part of the reason why the set is so expensive is because in order to get up to manipulation, which is hugely important for this set, you do have to go all the way to maximum 50 points in Occultist, which is very expensive. But that's the Nature's Call regalia. I haven't used it in a really long time, so experiment with that one pretty freely. This one's fairly interesting, the Dark One's gifts. You do have all of this really nice. You have a self-heal here, which is really nice. Randomly activates, so don't rely on it, but it is very interesting. Also, the fact that, oh, pardon me, you get to have more and longer lasting Wendigo totems. The fact that it heals you more. The fact that it reduces damage. Actually, both Bloody Pox and Wendigo totem reduce damage here, which is really nice. Even if the resistances on the gloves are pretty useless. Poison acid resistance and Aether resistance is fine here. But beyond that, you've got all of that, right? You have just basic increases here. You have really nice chaos resistance, though, here. You've got vitality resistance here. Good old elemental resistance, of course. But this is actually a very interesting combination you can run because, hello. Usually, again, possession, of course. Well, I'm actually going to talk about that in a hot second. But we have Bloody Pox, of course. And we've got Wendigo Totem. Right? Now, there are two ways I approach this. Possession, in which case I'm going into Blood of Drieg. I'm probably going melee. I'm actually going to go melee with this combination a lot of the time anyways, but I'll go into Blood of Drieg. I'll splash into Drieg's Evil Eye for some extra additional poison acid damage, right? That's something I'll do, or maybe I'll just use Blood of Drieg to enhance Bloody Pox, and maybe I'll go into Primal Strike. Again, it's one of my favorite skills. Maybe I will instead spam totems. There's a bunch of different options for a possession base. You could also go into Sigil of Consumption, but again, when you have Wendigo Totem, that's kind of unnecessary. Sometimes I'll go into the Slayer Witchfire Savagery combination, right? Very effective. But usually if I'm going to go with the possession setup, I am going to usually go into Blood of Drieg. Oops. And I'm going to put the rest of my points into Drieg's Evil Eye because I just really like Drieg's Evil Eye here for a bit of a splash. Chthonics are not usually highly resistant to this. You can just pull a point actually out of the Shaman. Actually, you can pull a couple of points out of the Shaman here just to finish. Come on, finish this up. Boom. And then your last points you can spend wherever. Maybe you want to spend them on Curse of Frailty. Maybe you want Sickle of Consumption, Cells of Witchfire. Maybe you throw them into Devouring Swarm, which is very effective with this particular combination. But you have plenty of options there. Now, the other alternative that you have is actually a hybrid Primal Bond build, which you probably could see coming. This is another build that is really effective with Barog's Bloody Arm, by the way. Just thought I'd throw that out there. Which you can also use this with the Briarthorn, of course. Very effective there. And go into the Briarthorn, obviously. This is also really good if you're using Primal Bond. Oops, I gotta put that last point in there. If you're using Primal Bond, it's also a bit more worth going into Savagery plus Slayer's Witchfire if you're into that. Again, that really depends. Again, same thing as with the Rotgeist, Emboldening Presence if you're melee, which, considering the boost to Wendigo Totem, you probably should be. I really do prefer melee with this build, but you don't have to. If you're not going to go melee with this build, you don't need Emboldening Presence, and the Wendigo Totem is mostly going to be used to keep your Briarthorn alive, or your Wendigo Totems, since you can actually bust out two of them. But you do have that option as well. It's a really interesting and very effective build. I usually will actually use this when I'm playing with others, family, friends, whoever, because having 2 Indigo Totems to throw around actually can really help keep both your ranged and your melee allies alive, regardless of where you are. So I am very fond of this in a multiplayer setting, and this is one of my go-tos in a multiplayer setting if I'm going to be playing a Conjurer. So just keep that in mind, but you'll basically a lot of the stuff that applies to the Rotgeist setup actually applies here, just with a focus on different skills. Rather than Primal Strike being a focus, you have Indigo Totem being a focus. Rather than Drieg's Evil Eye being a focus, you've got Bloody Pox as a focus. But a lot of the same rules apply, and you can cross over a lot of the skills there as well. So, with that, we come on to the final set, unless I missed one, in which case just leave it down in the comments below. But Bysmiel's Trinkets. Now, this is another full pet setup here, but this one's interesting in that it specifically is the familiar. Now, second off, that's one of the main interesting points. The other interesting point is that it is exclusively jewelry. I consider metals to be jewelry. I don't know if you do. We have an increase to all damage. We have an increase to emboldening presence and lightning strike. This is obviously the Necromancer version, but note the chaos resistance. We have aether resistance here. We have poison acid resistance here. The only real letdown is the elemental resistance here, but that's fine. We have Bysmiel's authority, which is really good at just stinking healing you and all your allies. Again, this is another set that I really enjoy playing with allies, with friends, with family, because that also heals non-pet allies, by the way, Bysmiel's authority. So basically, the last 2 sets here I use a lot with multiplayer, and it really depends on if I want to use pets or not. Because if I'm not using pets, I'm very likely going to be using the Dark Ones set. If I want to use pets, I'm going to be using Bysmiel's Trinkets. Okay? But just keep that in mind. But beyond that, obviously, when we're looking at this, we're looking at the familiar. And we're going all the way here. Now this set, unlike the previous set, the Nature's Regalia, which specifically increased Bonds of Bysmiel and Manipulation, really lending heavily to the use of that, with this one, we actually can go with... We don't necessarily have to go there, we don't have to go all the way there. We can go into Primal Bond, and I usually like to use Primal Bond, because you can save a lot of points by just yanking them out of here, right? Going with a 2-handed weapon and going Primal Strike. And that is absolutely stunning. Haha, my puns are on point. Anyways, you could also go into Indigo Totem if you or your Briarthorn need healing. Now again, if you're ranged, you don't necessarily need Emboldening Presence. But again, I also typically play this with allies, so I build Emboldening Presence anyways in case my allies are playing melee or just change to melee in the middle, which sometimes happens. If you've played with friends and family as well, you know the feels. So that's really effective as well. But usually, yeah, for me personally, I usually go most often into Indigo Totem, because with Blood Pact that inflicts bleeding, we've got the Primal Strike here for the bleed and everything, and then over here, you've got 1 point. You can either increase your attributes slightly here, or you can go into Mogdragon's Pact for a little bit of regeneration. You could alternatively choose not to go into Blood Pact and go into Mogdragon's Pact instead. I just really prefer Wendigo Totem with Blood Pact here because of its potential for healing my allies, including my Briarthorn. So that's typically what I do. What you basically do with the Bysmiel's Trinket set is you're basically becoming a Conjurer support. You're using your pets to boost your allies and yourself. You're using Primal Strike primarily for its stun, and you're using Wendigo Totem primarily for its heal, and you're doing less damage overall, absolutely, because after all, this is only really increasing your bleeding and physical damage. So while you'll be doing decent damage, you are by no means a powerhouse of the group, but you, through your Crow, through your Briarthorn, and through Bysmiel's Authority, the activatable skill, you're keeping your allies alive, you're keeping them buffed, and you're also keeping the enemy mostly stunned. So having a Conjurer in a group with Bysmiel's Trinkets is absolutely fantastic. This is actually one of the best ways I've found of supporting allies in a multiplayer scenario. Personally, from my experience. And I play multiplayer a decent... Like I said, roughly half of my playtime in Grim Dawn is with family and friends. I'm usually playing... Like, 50% of my gameplay is with a group. So, this is something that I've found to be one of the most effective ways of helping out those allies. And because it's all jewelry, you can very easily combine this with one of the other sets to focus on specific skills. For example, the Primal Strike setup, it's very easy to go into the Rotgeist, increase Primal Strike, do some extra vitality damage, and just really focus in on that if you want to, since I'm rather fond of it anyways. Or you could go with one of the other sets. It's very easy to combine with other sets. So, this is quite a long video because there are a lot of sets for this combination. And while I, again, am going to reiterate that a couple of these are a little bit outdated, and there was one that I have not played with this combination because it doesn't make sense to, Rotgeist. Use Rotgeist. Instead of the Drieg one. I hope this helped you in some way, to give you ideas on maybe some focused builds you want to go into in the future. Some ways of splashing a bunch of hybrid builds, because a lot of people... I really enjoyed making this video because a lot of people approach pets as an all-or-nothing experience, that you have to go 100% into pets or 100% not pets, and that's just not true. The Conjurer is one of the best ways of doing hybrid builds, and a lot of these builds, as I've shown you here, a lot of these sets can very easily incorporate pets, usually the Briarthorn, but not always, but can very easily incorporate some pets to boost their damage, to otherwise aid you in your journey. So with that, I do hope you found this useful. If you liked this, please like and subscribe. If you didn't, please ignore me. If you have any comments, questions, concerns, suggestions, ideas, requests, please leave them down in the comment section below. If I missed a set, I've been known to do that. Let me know. These are all the ones I could remember, having played with this combination. It's possible that there's a combination out there that I have not played with this... I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. An armor set that I have not played with this combination that maybe I should either try or maybe I should do in the future. Let me know. I have no problem with that. I'm testing a build that an earlier commenter talked about with the previous video of this series on the Nightblade Occultist, and I'm currently working that up and testing that out. I'm not done testing it yet. I'll make a video on that combination with that armor set, with that build, when I'm done testing that build. So expect that at some point in the future whenever I'm done with it. I don't have as much time as I'd like. I have a full-time job or whatever, so I don't have tons of time, but I am working on it. But, you know, feel free to request things if you want to. And, yeah, thank you very much for joining me, and have a great 24 hours.